Hello, my dear students. I miss being with you today. I understand you enjoyed a rousing game of vocab bingo, and that sounded like a lot of fun. I'm sorry I missed it. I just wanted to check in with you before you start your work for the day today, mostly because we didn't get the chance to discuss chapters 9 and 10. And I hate to not get to say a few words about 9 and 10 before you jump into 11 and 12. 12 is a chapter that's the crux of the whole book. If you count the number of chapters, you'll notice it's the very middle of the book. I don't know if you remember early on, I mentioned how there are 3 major scaffold scenes. The first one is when Hester has to stand on the scaffold in chapter 2, chapter 3, right? Holding her infant after she's been in prison for a number of months. The final scaffold scene is going to happen in one of the very last chapters. The second scaffold scene is in chapter 12, the very middle. So we're coming up on that. And before we get to that scene, which is like, whoa, all our main characters show up, and really only our main characters, Hester, Dimmesdale, Chillingworth, and Pearl in that scene. So I wanted to back up and just say a few things about the leech and the chilling chapter, the leech and his patient, right? So the leech, we understand that Roger Chillingworth has come into town and is now fulfilling the role of town doctor. Up till now, they really haven't had one, so everyone's very excited to have this learned doctor from Europe. Of course, there's so much dramatic irony, right? Dramatic irony is when we, the reader, know things that the characters don't know. So they don't know that they're inviting evil into their midst, right? Bent on revenge, no kind doctor. But they at first think he's a very kind doctor, and he takes a particular interest in Dimmesdale. And what I want to point out is that when these when the book was published and the readers were first reading it, they didn't know yet. I have told you, and the reason I told you is because I'm pretty sure the back of the book tells you, it's just kind of general cultural knowledge now that Dimmesdale is the man. But they didn't know, but they suspected. By now you're starting to suspect, but we haven't seen much of Dimmesdale. We saw him in that chapter 3 scene with Hester on the scaffold where he's saying, please do say who your compatriot in sin was, to relieve him of his guilt, but we don't know yet. Then we see him at the governor's mansion, and Pearl is pretty comfortable with him, and she's not comfortable with the other men, and, so they're thinking, okay. And now Chillingworth, who has promised to Hester, remember when he visits her in the prison, that he's going to find out who this guy is, and he's going to make him pay. He's going to make him suffer on the inside. So when Chillingworth starts to treat Dimmesdale, and why is he treating him? Because Dimmesdale is declining physically, right? There's this idea, it's really an ancient idea and almost a very medieval idea that if you are suffering on the inside in your spirit, your body also is going to manifest that. Then we get this moment. Did y'all pick up on this? Where not only are Chillingworth, and Dimmesdale is enjoying Chillingworth at first, right? There's a part where he says that he's enjoying basically talking with another educated person. They're out here in Boston, which isn't the intellectual, fancy, economically profound Boston that we know of now, but it's a very rugged Boston. It's just a colony. And so, here's this learned man from Europe. So he and Dimmesdale have some good and deep conversations, but it starts to turn, right? Even in this chapter called The Leech. By the way, you guys all know at this point that a leech is what they used to call a doctor. And you know why. Because it might have been before this time, or it might have been during this time. I'll confess, I don't know. Leeches, the leeches, the bugs that get on you in the water, they would attach them, something about sucking out the patient's blood was seen to be beneficial for certain illnesses and ailments. So a doctor was called a leech. I like to take that further. Think in terms of Dimmesdale's name, Dim. he is dimming, right? His physically and spiritually, he's growing weak, he's growing pale, and he's dimming because Chillingworth has latched onto him, and is leeching, kind of like sucking the spiritual life out of him. Whoa, right? Okay, so then we realize that they've moved in together. They're roommates. This is a bad situation. This is very bad. And I think it's in this chapter that if you didn't know Dimmesdale was the man, you'd start to really wonder, because you think, why is Chillingworth paying this much attention to him? So let's see. There's a point in the Leech chapter toward the end of it. Did you pick up on this? The people of the town, in the beginning, even the beginning of the chapter, they were all for this doctor. They were so glad to have him in their community. They were so glad he's taking care of their beloved minister. Remember, they loved Dimmesdale. He's so tender and sensitive and gives such beautiful sermons. And he seems so humble. That's one of the main things. They think that Dimmesdale seems so humble. Hypocrisy is a word that we'll dive into in class, right? So Chillingworth is leeching out the life force of his patient. The people of the town actually start to notice, though, over time, that what happens to Chillingworth's physical attributes. Do you remember? He actually starts to grow kind of creepy looking and more evil. No longer the kindly doctor that they thought he was in the beginning. He is getting these outer manifestations of what's on the inside of him as well. So let's see. So then the people are like, wait a minute, where did he actually come from? And what is he doing Dimmesdale good? Dimmesdale, remember, has no idea Chillingworth is the husband of Hester. He doesn't know. So he starts even to sense like this is uncomfortable. And you'll see that in the next chapter even more. Chapter 11 is very much about Dimmesdale's decline and struggle. But he kind of, in his awareness of his sin and his guilt, he thinks he deserves this treatment by Chillingworth. Whatever reason Chillingworth's doing this to him, he doesn't know why. He thinks he deserves it. It's a way of penance, right? So any of you who have guilt as your theme, think about that. How Dimmesdale kind of puts himself, look for actual statements of his or descriptions of him in this section of chapters about how he's willing to undergo this kind of torture because he thinks that's what he deserves. Okay, so let's see. So we're in the leech and his patient. There's this moment where Dimmesdale is looking out a window. Did you guys catch this? And the physician, the leech, Chillingworth, has planted a flower outside the window, and Dimmesdale is just kind of gazing at it, and he says, "Where, my kind doctor, did you gather these herbs?" The doctor uses lots of herbs, right? Lots of herbs and flowers and things for his medicine. He is actually treating people in town. We trust he's doing it well and honestly. Dimmesdale sees this plant. "Doctor, where did you gather those herbs with such a dark, flabby leaf?" Chillingworth says, "Even in the graveyard, here at hand." The graveyard nearby. "They are new to me. I found them growing on a grave, which bore no tombstone, nor other memorial of the dead man save these ugly weeds that have taken upon themselves to keep him in remembrance. They grew out of his heart, and typify, it may be, some hideous secret that was buried with him, and which he had done better to confess during his lifetime." So much is going on in that little paragraph. If you got this, it's the bottom of 89, top of 90. If you're doing nature, this ugly flabby weed counts as nature, right? How creepy is Chillingworth? He found it in a grave. He planted it. He's growing it, using it for medicinal purposes. Or is he just using it to freak out Dimmesdale? Dimmesdale notices it's ugly. What is this? And he says it grew out of the heart of a man who wasn't repentant, who hadn't confessed his sin. Well, Chillingworth couldn't have known that, right? If he did indeed even find it growing on a grave. He is toying, he is playing with Dimmesdale's mind, trying to get Dimmesdale to confess. He is pretty convinced at this point Dimmesdale's the man, but he can't know for sure till he has proof. Spoiler that you all know, if you've read this far to the end of this chapter, he gets his proof, right? So let's jump ahead to that. He's making Dimmesdale miserable. Well, we'll jump ahead so you have time to get on with your work today and your reading. So what happens at the very end, right? He can't convince Dimmesdale to confess. He can't get Dimmesdale to admit that Dimmesdale is keeping something from him, but Chillingworth can tell he is, and he suspects what it is, but he just tries and he can't, and Dimmesdale keeps putting up this wall. But one day, Dimmesdale does what? He falls asleep. He falls so fast asleep that when Chillingworth comes into the room, he doesn't stir. Immediately, Roger Chillingworth, without any extraordinary precaution, he doesn't tiptoe in. He just goes straight to Dimmesdale. This is what he's been waiting for. He advanced directly in front of his patient, laid his hand upon his bosom, upon his chest, and thrust aside the vestment. The vestment is what you call what a clergyman wore at that time, that hitherto had always covered it. Dimmesdale had never let anyone see his actual chest, which I think is pretty normal for Puritan society, but Hawthorne wants to point that out. So Chillingworth pulls it aside, exposes Dimmesdale's chest. What does he see? We're not told. Here's my question for you. What do you think he saw? Did he see something? Did he see nothing? Was what he saw something that Dimmesdale had put there? Was what he saw something that had kind of supernaturally kind of engraved itself upon Dimmesdale as a marker? What did Chillingworth see? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in class Thursday. But with what a wild look of wonder, joy, and horror. This is who Chillingworth is. He's basically doing an evil little happy dance, right? This is what he has wanted to see. What if, when we understood that someone else had sinned in a particular way, we rejoiced in that sin? Right? He is really kind of in the depths. If we're thinking in terms of sin in this book, look at Chillingworth and his response here to whatever he's just discovered. Well, we know what he's discovered, but we don't know exactly in what form he found it about Dimmesdale. But now he knows Dimmesdale's the man. With what a ghastly rapture, with what a ghastly rapture, as it were, too mighty to be expressed only by the eye and features. So it's not only in his face, therefore bursting forth through the whole ugliness of his figure, and making itself even riotously manifest by the extravagant gestures with which he threw up his arms toward the ceiling and stamped his foot upon the floor. Had a man seen old Roger Chillingworth at that moment of his ecstasy, he would have had no need to ask how Satan comports himself. Basically, how Satan acts. Chillingworth was acting the way Satan would act, rejoicing in a sinner fallen. When a precious human soul is lost to heaven and won into his kingdom. But what distinguished the physician's ecstasy from Satan's was the trait of wonder in it that Satan presumably would have known, and Chillingworth had just discovered what he wanted to know, and now we find he wanted to be true all along. He's been harassing and torturing the right person. So now you can move on, do your reading for tomorrow. I really look forward to discussing the next two chapters, and we'll back up a little bit and enjoy this too. Final question for you. Several of you in the beginning were inclined to like Chillingworth, somewhat at least. I don't know if you had empathy for him or sympathy for his plight, this wife who's gone off and had an affair and had a baby, or if you just find him enjoyable, even in his creepy evilness. So those of you who, for whatever reason, feel a little bit of, okay, I might be a little bit Team Chillingworth. Let's talk about that too, because it is fun to read about him. He's such an amusingly, horribly evil, creepy character. All right, guys. Good luck with your work. Ask me if you have questions, and I will see you tomorrow.